spiritual resurrection, loneliness, despair, depression, the act of dying, losing a loved one. Today's poem is one that has a surprising amount of interpretations, especially for a poem that seems, on the surface, relatively straightforward. But Emily Dickinson would not stop, with a relatively straightforward poem. There will always be layers to dig through with her work. I think my interpretation of the poem, straight up, flat out, is probably more of a boring interpretation, but there are two very, very big questions that you have to ask yourself in order to have any concept or interpretation of what this poem might be about. This video is part of 3 separate playlists here on the channel. Number 1 being obviously the Echoes of Emily playlist, but number 2 being a playlist of Emily Dickinson poetry discussions, and third, the general playlist for poetry discussions. If you like or appreciate the work that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. So consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more literature in the future. It was not death, for I stood up, and all the dead lie down. It was not night, for all the bells put out their tongues for noon. It was not frost, for on my flesh I felt siroco's crawl, nor fire, for just my marble feet could keep a chancel cool. And yet it tasted like them all. The figures I have seen set orderly for burial reminded me of mine, as if my life were shaven and fitted to a frame, and could not breathe without a key, and 'twas like midnight some, when everything that ticked has stopped, and space stares all around, or grisly frost's first autumn morns repeal the beating ground. But most like chaos, stopless, cool, without a chance or spar, or even a report of land to justify despair. So it might benefit us to take just a brief walk through this poem. It was not death, for I stood up, and all the dead lie down. The big question is, what is it? Right? What is it, which is the basis of this poem? Whatever it is, whatever we decide that interpretation to be, it was not death, for our speaker stood up. It was not night, for all the bells put out their tongues at noon. It was not death, and it was not nighttime, because you could hear the church bells ringing. It was not frost, for on my flesh I felt siroco's crawl. Now, going to be 100% honest, I don't know if that is pronounced the way I pronounced it, but what it is it is I believe, a warm wind from the desert out over the plains. So when the warm wind from the desert blows over the plains, and in fact, if memory serves me, it is actually, as that term pertains to a specific desert and a specific plains, but I don't remember the exact specifics there. Nor fire, for just my marble feet could keep a chancel cool. This is a term which refers to a section of a church building. So, it was not cold, for I felt the heat, and it was not fire, for I felt the cold. My cold was fanning out, in fact, and yet it tasted like them all. This is a strange choice of sensory perceptions to me, but who am I to tell Emily Dickinson anything? The figures I have seen set orderly for burial remind me of mine. This might be what the it in question is. It was not death. The reaction to these things was not death, but seeing them reminded me of my burial. As if my life were shaven and fitted to a frame, and could not breathe without a key, and 'twas like midnight some. So, I think that I think that the it in question is a little bit more broad than death itself, right? Um, Obviously, it's not death because she stood up. But what I mean by that is what we're getting to here in this portion of the poem in particular. I do not think that it pertains necessarily, necessarily pertains to death, because in this section of the poem, in this part of the poem, as if my life were shaven and fitted to a frame, that is almost universally a description which would fit the life of people who suffer from so many things. Depression, oh, it feels like my life is in this little box. Anxiety, it feels like my life is in this little box. Manic depressive, it feels like my life is dictated into this little box. So that is what I take from that part of the poem and this part of the poem. And could not breathe without a key, and 'twas like midnight some, when everything that ticked has stopped, and space stares all around, or grisly frost's first autumn morns repeal the beating ground. What we're doing here is interesting because we're giving this, right, has stopped. When everything that ticked has stopped. And then we're going to get back to this liminal here, the superliminal perhaps goes everywhere. We have space staring. We have grisly frosts, which is just a phenomenal term. Autumn mornings. We have the beating ground. But most, like chaos, stopless, cool, without a chance or spar or even a report of land to justify despair. All of this stuff feels like chaos. That's where we're at. We're in chaos. Chaos and despair, however. Chaos and despair are two words that I would not necessarily say are inextricably linked. This makes this poem feel more like it's about anxiety to me than perhaps depression. This feels like the hectic sort of non-quiet that can overtake a person. So there's two real questions very early in this poem. What is the it at play? How strictly are we defining death? Because I think that there are a great deal of people who suffer with certain types of, like I said, anxiety, depression, etc., who would say, yeah, I mean, I'm alive, but isn't this a certain type of death? How strictly do we define death? Is there a barrier for entry to death, or is it measured in degree? Do we all of a sudden become dead when we stop breathing? Biologically, yes. But we're talking about the word itself. Is there something to be as good as dead? What would that look like? It was not death, but I may as well have been. What is the it in question? So for me, I've been over the answers a little bit. Is this depression, anxiety, etc.? Are we talking about in this poem the it in question being that level of depression was not death because I could get out of bed and all the dead lie down, but boy, did it feel like it. That's where I think this poem is firmly rooted. Um, I want to talk about things on a hauntological as well as on a nihilistic frame here. So, nihilism. This stanza here. I would like to draw some attention to this stanza here. As if my life were shaven and fitted to a frame, and could not breathe without a key, and 'twas like midnight some. My favorite nihilistic quote is from Pisarev, who says, this is the ultimatum of our camp. We will strike out right, we will strike out left. What will blow to smithereens is rubbish and does not matter. What will stand the blow is good. Either way, we must strike out right and strike out left. No harm will or can come of it. While that might be a bit short-sighted, there certainly can be harm that comes of it. I think that there are individuals who are, whether this is, tabula rasa or, it's interesting to think that some things are sort of hardwired into us, right? Is there a level of philosophy that might be hardwired into us? Are there some of us that are born derelict towards nihilism? Or are they the events of our lives that prime us for these ideas to make sense to us? Maybe it's both, but I don't think that the former ever really gets talked about. Are there some among us who were born to be stoic? Are there some among us who were just crafted bit by bit along the way to, insert your favorite philosophy here? Were you born to be a nihilist? Were you born to be a stoic? Were you born to be Epicurean? Or were you shaped along the way? It's interesting to think in that way that if there are some of us who, whether it is by nature or nurture, are primed to at a point in our lives express a type of philosophy. What if someone was, quote unquote, born or shaped nihilist? Born or shaped to want to create their own values, their own system of judgments, their own hierarchy of those things which are valuable in life. If that person were in a society that would not allow such a thing, maybe this is how they would feel, as if their life were shaven and fitted to a frame. Right? And finally, hauntologically. Here is a term which is big in hauntology: liminal, relating to a transitional or intermediate stage, occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary or threshold. We get here. The statement, "It was not death, for I stood up, and all the dead lie down." However, never, not once or ever in this poem does our speaker claim to be alive. Our speaker here says, "Look, I wasn't dead." "Yes, you are." "I'm not dead." I'm old enough to get that reference, so if you don't, you are too young to watch poetry videos online. But it was not death, for I stood up, and all the dead lie down. But we never get told I was alive. We get told, but most like chaos, stopless, cool, without a chance or spar or even report of land to justify despair. That is where we close this poem. Our speaker, therefore, is here existing in some type of liminal space, some type betwixt life and death. It was not death, for I stood up, and all the dead lie down. It was not night, for all the bells put out their tongues for noon. It was not frost, for on my flesh I felt siroccos crawl, nor fire, for just my marble feet could keep a chancel cool. And yet it tasted like them all. The figures I have seen set orderly for burial reminded me of mine, as if my life were shaven and fitted to a frame, and could not breathe without a key, and 'twas like midnight some, when everything that ticked has stopped, and space stares all around, or grisly frost's first autumn morns repeal the beating ground. But most like chaos, stopless, cool, without a chance or spar, or even a report of land to justify despair.